Thank you, Gina, and thanks for having me here today. I always, I always feel a little embarrassed when people are like, "Can you speak about the Ulma family?" I was just telling I ran into Ian had some young fellows who he would mentor, and I just ran into one here today. Claire, I don't know if she came back, but anyways, and I was telling her like our life with the Ulma family is very providential, but I don't think of myself as an expert on them, but people often ask me to talk about them. So I hope I can share something of their life, share something of the way they influenced my life and the life of my children and my late husband, Ian, and yeah, just how we learned more about Christianity and the cross through the Ulma family story and through our own suffering. So 2 years ago, in this exact place, my husband's funeral. So he was 35 years old. We had 7 children. So this is a picture of him. This is him and I. I mean, like, we were pretty young, for 3 years into marriage, 4 years into marriage. And these are our 7 kids. This one, Victoria and Mary Josephine, who's named after the Ulma parents and one of the Ulma children. I was pregnant with her. I was pregnant with her when Ian was diagnosed. And so our doctor, who's a very devout Catholic woman, said, "You need to pray to the Ulma family." And she told us on March 24th, as Gina said, that Ian was sick with leukemia. This came as a great shock to us. My husband was very strong. He was very young. No one thought he could be sick with anything. I mean, even the doctors in the hospital would always say, "Oh, you're not sick with leukemia." I'm like, "He is. I know. I wish he weren't." He had a very strong spirit, and he was just very young and strong. So I'll share about that today, and I want to share about the Ulma family, our experience with them throughout. So I've weaved this story many times, but the writing is a little more clearly woven than maybe what I'll say today, but I'll do my best. So 2 years ago, I stood in this exact spot and spoke of Ian's nobility and holiness in the face of tremendous suffering. The last Sunday of his life here on earth, he and I sat in the church after Mass. He was on oxygen and he was in a wheelchair. Only 35 years old, this terrible disease and the drugs to fight the disease had ravaged his body. I said to him as we sat in the church, I said, "It feels safe here." He agreed. I said, "It's like the bad guys can't get us here. Can we just stay here? We'll just get sleeping bags and stay here in this church and, maybe they just can't get us here." And yeah, he through his year and a half of suffering with this disease, had just sort of gotten more and more purified and holy throughout. But he just looked at me and he said, "That's the secret." And I was like, what's the secret? Tell me all the secrets. I want to know. And he said, "That's the secret of Christianity. The bad guys can't get us anywhere." And I really hung on to that because I was very young when, I'm still quite young. Like when he got sick, I just kind of didn't believe God would take a man with 7 children who was strong and at the height of his career and his manlyhood. Why would God take him from this earth? So I just didn't really believe that is what was going to happen. So in Ian's suffering and death, it seemed to me that many secrets of Christianity started to reveal themselves. And so I'm going to talk now about Ian's story, and then I'll go back to the Ulma family and sort of how they wove into our story. I should say, though, throughout what I'm talking about with Ian, the Ulmas were there always. Since Dr. Dwayne, our doctor, told us to pray to them, every night we prayed to them. Every day I talked to them. Every moment they were there, I asked them to watch over the children. And each of their children were very similar age to our children. So first I just want to talk about Ian and my life and marriage, and then I'll go back to the Ulmas. So Ian and I
were married for almost 10 years. We shared the grace of having 7 children together before he died. And as I said, I was 4 months pregnant with our 7th when he was diagnosed with leukemia. So when Dr. Dwayne told us on March 24th, it took maybe 2 weeks before he was on his deathbed. It was a very aggressive form of leukemia. And so as soon as that happened, they rushed him to Georgetown Hospital, and it was a year after COVID, so I had to kind of fight my way in there. But then once I was in, I just didn't, I'd left to see the children for a few hours, but I just wouldn't leave, so I just slept there. So for 62 days, he and I and our unborn child slept in a hospital room together at Georgetown Hospital in Washington, D.C. I took care of him and assisted the doctors and nurses who tried to cure him of this terrible disease with drugs whose effects almost killed him on multiple occasions. And for the next 9 months, thousands of people prayed for our family, and hundreds helped us materially as we fought the cancer with the most groundbreaking scientific medicines. The process was grueling, and at the end of those 9 months, when we hoped to hear he had been cured and was in remission, we instead found out that the cancer had returned in full force and as deadly as ever. At first, Ian and I thought this cancer was a challenge to be conquered, a suffering to be endured for the sake of our children and others' salvation, and a process of purification for us to learn to love one another and our children more deeply. After the cancer returned, despite the best medical treatments, we had to face the reality of our situation. At that point, we turned to even deeper prayer. We began a 54-day novena, and our priest and many generous other souls with us begged our Lord for a miracle, especially through the intercession of the Ulma family. There was no doubt ever in my mind until a few minutes after Ian died that God would heal him of this terrible disease. As I said, a handsome and good man in the height of his career, a devoted husband and father to 7 children, what sense was there for the sake of God's kingdom for him to die? His life so full and his person having so much more to give. Surely our good and kind and merciful Lord wouldn't allow something like this to happen. And yet, that miracle of Ian being cured of cancer never happened. Or if it did, our Lord chose to take my beloved husband to live with him forever in paradise anyway. Where, as a believing Christian, a devout Catholic of 33 years, where did this leave me? Widowed with 7 children, with my best friend and the man I had built everything good in my life with, the father of my children, separated from us forever until our own moment when the Lord would call each of us home. Certainly would seem that if ever there was a time to lose my faith and trust in God and not trust in God and his goodness, it would be this moment. And yet what I found was actually the opposite. What I found in this journey of suffering and Ian's death, and in my own suffering and the children's suffering, as well as his parents and his brother's suffering, I found that not only was our Lord with us, he was closer to us than I could have ever known. And in fact, it was because of the suffering, of his suffering, that his presence and his mercy was more known to me than it had ever been in all of my existence. How did this happen? So first I should say something about Ian and my marriage. We were married, as I said, very young. I was 22, he was 24. He had been a convert to Catholicism just a year before we got married. And we both had very, very high ideals and knew nothing about a practical life of marriage. We were madly in love, best friends, talked about philosophy, theology, politics, literature, and were both teachers who thought our babies would be born ready to talk about Plato's Republic. Before we were married a year, we had twins. We had hurt one another accidentally often by holding such different practical positions about how to go about simple things like dinner. And even though theoretically we agreed on everything. We also had very little money, although as somehow every time we had another baby, he'd get a better job. I always joked with him. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing, but just keep doing it. So I I processed everything externally. He processed everything internally, and I didn't understand it until I read Kristen Lavren's daughter about Scandinavian people, and I was like, oh, that's what's going on in there, because I just thought he didn't have emotions or feel anything. There were other difficulties in our marriage, but both he and I did the best we could, and slowly our marriage was becoming more stable and less difficult. However, all those years of misunderstanding lent itself to more challenges between us, because there was so much hurt between us, mostly accidental. So yeah, I want to say Ian was always a noble, an upright, kind, and courteous man. When we met the cancer doctor for the first time, he turned to the doctor. The doctor said, how are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm doing great. How are you? And shook his hand. And the doctor left the room, and I hit him. I was like, you need to act sicker. We're in the cancer doctor's room right now. This is not a time to be noble and upright and friendly. You need to act sick, your blood does not look good. Anyways, he was just that way though. Every doctor and nurse loved him and were very attached to his struggle as well as to our story. No one believed he was as sick as he was until they saw the blood work, because his spirit was so strong. So what I want to say is watching Ian suffer so nobly and fearfully made me love him and want to emulate his example in my own life. There was no time for arguing or petty disagreements about how something should get done. And this time we actually talked a lot less and acted less in the world than we had before. He was basically in a prison of his own sick body, unable to externally do much of what he had been able to do before. And it was the joy of my life to accompany him in his suffering, despite having lost my own homemaking, homeschooling, and ability to care exclusively for our children. John Paul II says that when we suffer, God in his mercy allows us to re-enter into the Garden of Eden. We get to love like we had before the fall. And yeah, that's kind of exactly what I experienced, because when everything external is sort of stripped away, then you actually begin to see what really matters. And I think that's what happened for he and I. We just started to see oh, it wasn't what time dinner was that mattered to us, right? It was actually loving one another, and him, just being with one another in the suffering that we were going through. And I think because he had gotten so sick, that's what we learned is I really didn't know every day when I woke up if he'd still be alive. So it didn't make sense to argue about anything or to try to make the details all figured out and right. And that was just, it was living in God's grace. In the last 4 months of Ian's life, when it became clear that the medicines would most likely not work, and all we had left was to beg for a miraculous healing, our marriage, our home, our life with our children was so incredibly filled with joy. Our Lord's burden, his yoke was easy and his burden light as he accompanied us in these last few months together. Ian had treatments in the hospital, but lived with the children and I at home, and all we had were our small moments together to talk, laugh, and care for one another. The children would bring Daddy breakfast. Ben, my oldest son, and Ian would watch a soccer game together. Ian would read the little ones' books, and in the evening after dinner, we visited with friends. The whole home was filled with God's grace, and every moment felt like eternity, living in the ever-growing love of God. Eventually, after a month in Philadelphia with a clinical trial, it became clear there was nothing else the doctors could do. So Ian, the children, and I, and Ian's parents and brother packed up our cars and headed for home, where Ian would die. He was on oxygen and could barely walk. A few days after heading home, it became clear that he was dying, and so we all gathered around his bed. We sang every hymn and song we knew as a family. I prayed every prayer I had ever known and wish I had known more. Our priest came and prayed with us, and friends came and sang beautiful hymns while we all held him and told him to go and be with our Lord. The last night before he had died, he had been fevering and in a ton of pain for 2 days. It was 3:00 in the morning, and I was finishing our last prayers I would say with him every night of his sickness. When I went to bless him with holy water, something in him changed. It was actually, so I brought this icon here of the Ulma family. My sister's husband's brother's wife made it for us. So it was actually, I touched the Ulma family icon to him. I would touch all our holy things. We had crucifixes and that, and someone else gave us another relic. And so I touched it to him, and he opened his eyes very wide. So he had been fevering and was really out of it and sort of needed pain medicine. And then all of a sudden, the fever was gone, and he opened his eyes, and he said, "Nama, nama, nama." And actually, Dr. Dwayne was in the room, so I was like, both Dr. and I were like, "What? What is it, Ian? What do you need?" And he said, "I think I can." And I said, "You can't go anymore. It's okay. If you can't go anymore, it's okay. You can go and be with our Lord." And he said, "I think I can eat something." So I started to cry, and so Dr. Dwayne ran downstairs to get food, and I had the Ulma family icon right in front of me, and I was like, he was like, "I can't," and then he said, "I can't thank you enough." And I was like, "Don't thank me, thank the Ulma family," because honestly, he looked better. It was weird. I was like, man, when Lazarus woke up from the dead, he must have been so hungry. He must have just been like, "I can eat something now," it was just kind of that feeling. I was like, is he, So oddly, I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe the Ulma family did give us the miracle of him being healed, but God was just like, "I'm taking him though. He's mine." But I don't know. And I'm not people are like, "You're going to contact the Vatican." I'm like, I don't need to do that. But it was, so I had a few more hours with him, and the next day he just laid like this the whole day. He didn't need any more pain medicine. He wasn't fevering. His eyes were closed, but there were close family and friends, and the kids were there with us throughout the day. But I think that last day was really for us. It was another gift Ian gave to us to just show us the way my priest put it was that there was a quickening happening, as his body was dying, his soul was getting stronger, and you could just see that he was just becoming more radiant. And his dad and mom are not, or his dad's a fallen away Catholic, and his brother's not, but they were all in there, and yeah, they were just you could not be there and think that our Lord wasn't present, because he was so present. Even his brother, who's not religious at all, was Ian was in a different world at those last 18 hours with us, and we just kind of got to be with him there. So then we held him, we prayed, we sang songs, and then he died, and went to be with our Lord forever. So I think, I said it at the beginning, there were sort of secrets of Christianity that opened up for me. One was just that I realized, I think I saw in that moment, I think our whole marriage, I had thought Ian was mine. And I realized, he's our Lord's. It wasn't just in that moment, actually. There was sort of in Philadelphia, there was a time I was praying, and our Lord just said to me, he was like, "Give him to me." I'm like, "No, I'm not doing that." It's a bad idea. He's like, no, just give him to me. I'll take care of him. And so I did. I was like, he's his anyways. But I think it wasn't until he died that I realized, my husband is our Lord's, right? Belong to our Lord. All of our children belong to our Lord. They're not ours, right? We're stewards over each other, especially, our children, but really we belong to God. And marriage is an image of that, right? I think I got very confused thinking that marriage was the real thing. It's that's it. And it wasn't really until he died that I realized, like, oh, that's like, marriage is this beautiful image of the real thing, of our relation with God, right? Which, I mean, that's, of course, that's a tradition of the Catholic Church, but I didn't know it until Ian died. Okay, so I needed to tell that story, but now I want to actually talk about the Ulma family for just briefly. Like I said, I'm not a historian, although I do love them and I'm interested in their lives, but I want to just say sort of what happened with us and them while he was sick. So, and so I think another thing that I thought before Ian died was I was a prosperity gospel Christian, not on purpose. But my brother put it, he was like, health and wealth. And I was like, health and wealth. Like, you say your prayers and God gives you like not too much money, but like enough money, to feed your kids and, maybe having like something nice and you're healthy, right? And your kids are healthy and stuff. And then, as long as I say my prayers, God will give me those things. And so what I want to say about the Ulma family, because I've done a lot of reflecting on it because people ask me to talk so much about them. So I've even talked about how do you talk about the Ulma family to small children, right? It's kind of a terrible story. Like the mom, the dad, all the children are killed. Why are we telling this story? Right? Like to small children, especially, like adults maybe, but I realize is like we tell this story, I mean, one, because they're the first family of martyrs, right? Like that's really incredible. But two, it's because like it's not health and wealth that we're seeking as Christians, right? We're seeking something much deeper than that. And that doesn't mean we don't try to live a good life. And like, obviously, like it's good for like to support your family and that sort of thing. But so what I want to say about the Ulma family is nowhere is this heresy of health and wealth more refuted than in the life of our Lord and Our Lady and Saint Joseph, or in the life of the saints. And in the case of our meditation for today, the Ulma family. The life of the Christian united to Christ's passion and death on the cross is a crucifixion. It's a living out of the tensions in this world between our horizontal existence here in time and our vertical existence, living in this world but not of this world. That tension is often seen most clearly in the wholeness of the church, consecrated religious who give up the possibility of earthly children, Catholic families open to life in so many forms that often bring suffering with the earthly joy of new life. But in truth, all of us are called to live both tensions as Christians. As families, we are open to children, and with children comes suffering and risk, and a need to be open to our Lord and Our Lady as their father and mother, and not just us. And as ourselves, as mothers and fathers, as being insufficient to give them all that they need. The Ulma family are a perfect example for us of this tension. They hold together two things that we often think of as being opposed: having children, raising a family, taking risks to help, having children and raising a family, and taking risks to help others. Risks that to the secular world look stupid and foolish. I'm sure we all have different temptations in this regard. Some of us maybe are more insular, want to protect everyone and our children in our homes. Some of us maybe are more outward focusing and less protective of our children. But like actually we're called to do both as Christians, right? Moving outside our comfort zones, embracing our crosses as they come. Living these tensions in our modern world between love of our own and love of our neighbors is what we're called to. And something that the Ulma family continue to live and teach us to this day. So when Ian was sick, after especially the 9 months, I asked people who had been praying to reach out to the Ulma family in Poland, because, they were, there's the icon. They were so young that Victoria's parents were still alive when she was killed. So like all their aunts, their cousins, their uncles, the grandparents were still alive when they were killed. And they're still like in Markova. We went and visited them. Actually you could see on the video downstairs, like their family is still there and flourishing. So there were 20 people who contacted this little village in Poland and were like, we need relics now, and the people of Markova were like, we know about Ian, we know he's sick, we're praying for him, we don't have any relics. Because they were actually only servants of God. They weren't blessed yet, and you don't actually have any relics of the bodies until they become blessed. I didn't know this. So one person got through to this journalist in Poland who spoke obviously English and Polish. So she drove down there. She's like, I'm gonna go get those relics for Ian. And she was just incredible. She's on that video down there. So she went down there, and this was the email she sent to us. She said, I have two contacts, Jerzy Ulma and Ursula Nimczyzik, who Ursula's on the video down there too. She's the niece of Victoria's. She's actually married to Victoria's uncle. That's what it is. So this is what Mrs. Ursula, who's one of the most beautiful women I've ever met, she says, this is what she said, I don't have much of souvenirs. That's what she said. And then she says, these walls I live in are witness to Victoria's life and her children, who often spent time in my house. She told me, what I can give to Mr. Ian is a prayer, which I do. And my grandkids are praying for him, as well as our parish community. We have a prayer group that is praying for his health, and we believe that the good God will save him. So this is from the journalist. She said, she told me, and I said, I will write that down so you can send it to Ian. The parish priest in Markova is involved in prayers and asks his parishioners to pray for Ian through the intercession of the Ulma family. I think it's pretty powerful. They are praying literally in the walls that have witnessed the lives of the saints of this saintly family. And then this was the thing that I now live by, that Mrs. Ursula said. She said, my father-in-law, who was Victoria's father, said to me when I was entering the house where they were killed, many years after the tragedy, he said, my child, remember that this life is a service, and we only live on this earth to serve others. So this is the father of Victoria. His daughter, his son-in-law, his 7 grandchildren are all killed, and that was what he said. Right? I mean, these are people of just tremendous faith who deeply know about suffering and what Christianity is about. I think that actually, I want to end with that because I actually think that is really the secret to Christianity is serving others, right? Whatever it is in our families, in our marriages, with our children, with those outside our families, it's serving others that is actually what we're called to do in this life.